You think you know World War II. You don't.
You've seen the movies. You picture the grand strategy, the righteous cause, the heroic triumph. You see the flag raising, the handshake, the black and white image of a smiling veteran returning home. You imagine yourself in that uniform, ready for the adventure, ready to fight for a better world. Forget the adventure, forget the heroics. Because the truth is statistical, brutal, and utterly unromantic. If you were somehow teleported into the 6-year hellscape that was the Second World War, you wouldn't survive a week. You wouldn't be a hero. You'd be a footnote in a casualty report, or worse, a nameless ghost swallowed by history's largest, most efficient meat grinder. Why? Because the enemy wasn't just the men in the opposing trenches. The enemy was the mud, the cold, the ideology, the bureaucracy, the disease, and the sheer, calculated indifference to human life. You could survive the bullet and still be guaranteed death by the paperwork. Tonight, we're not talking about D-Day or Pearl Harbor. We're going deeper. We're diving into the unvarnished truth of your guaranteed, visceral, ugly end. We're going to look at the 9 ways the modern pampered you would be systematically, statistically, and psychologically annihilated by the greatest catastrophe in history. Before we start the descent, and I promise this is going to get very dark very fast, if you genuinely appreciate this kind of brutal, honest history, hit that like button and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to keep pulling back the curtain on the historical myths we've been sold. Dim the lights, turn the fan on high. You're going to need to feel cold just to appreciate what's coming. Part 1, the Eastern Front, the meat grinder of ideological total war. We start where the war truly died, where it shed all pretense of being a civilized conflict. We start in the East, the Ostfront, the conflict between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, a war so barbaric, so fundamentally devoid of moral restraint that every other theater of World War II combined pales in comparison to its sheer, mind-numbing carnage. You are now a soldier, German or Soviet, deployed in 1941. Your survival window just slammed shut. The statistical certainty of death. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. They are your first, unavoidable death sentence. This is the 80% rule. Over 4 out of every 5 German soldiers killed in World War II died fighting on the Eastern Front. 4 out of 5. Of the 72 million total casualties the Soviet Union suffered, military and civilian combined, almost all of them occurred here, on their own soil. You aren't joining an army, you're entering a geographic meat grinder designed to render human life meaningless. Think about that. If you're a fresh, optimistic recruit, you have an 80% statistical certainty that your corpse will be found frozen in the mud, thousands of miles from home. That's not a risk, that's an appointment. For the Soviet side, it was often worse. The practice of personnel and equipment attrition wasn't a failure of command, but it was the strategy. The Soviet High Command viewed manpower as a resource more expendable than steel, using human waves, unarmed men instructed to pick up the rifles of the dead men in front of them to swamp German defenses. You are literally sent out as bait, as a biological tool to soak up enemy fire. You are a projectile, not a person. The German response was an equally relentless, high-intensity engagement. There were no static lines for 4 years. Just continuous, close quarters, fanatical fighting in dense forests, muddy fields, and burning cities. You might survive one battle, but the next one starts 10 minutes later. The sheer rate of battlefield death and permanent disability meant that if you didn't die instantly, you would likely become one of the millions whose limbs were shattered, whose lungs were perforated, or whose sanity was irrevocably cracked by the ceaseless noise and violence. You don't have an expiration date. You have an hourly countdown. The climate as a weapon of mass destruction. So you survive the first battle. Well done. Now, you meet your second, less visible enemy. An enemy that has no morals, no fatigue, and zero intent of taking prisoners. the climate. First, the winter scythe, that brutal Russian winter. Forget the picturesque snow globe image. This is the cold that burns. Temperatures regularly plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius, a degree of cold you sitting in your climate-controlled home cannot fathom. Your gun lubricant freezes, your engine blocks crack, your rations turn to solid ice that can't be chewed. But the real killer is what it does to you. Frostbite is not an inconvenience. It's a form of amputation without anesthesia. Your toes turn black and die. Your fingers become useless, frozen clubs, rendering your rifle an expensive club. Hypothermia isn't a quick fade-out. It's a slow, paralyzing terror where you shed your clothes in a paradoxical last burst of heat before your heart simply stops. You die shivering, alone, under a blanket of snow that will preserve your body perfectly until spring. And if you thought winter was bad, you haven't met the Rasputitsa. Twice a year, in spring and autumn, the thaws turn the entire, massive territory into a quicksand of the steppes. The mud is not terrain. It is an enemy general. Vehicles sink up to their axles, supply horses founder and die, and roads cease to exist. You are not walking, you are slogging through miles of knee-deep, viscous sludge that weighs down your boots, saps your energy, and traps you. You can't retreat. You can't advance. You are a sitting duck, exposed, shivering, and starving, because the resupply truck that was supposed to bring your food is currently buried in a kilometer of filth 20 miles back. The climate ensures your death regardless of the enemy's skill. The doctrine of annihilation and non-surrender. Now, let's talk about the psychological horror. On the Eastern Front, there was no concept of a strategic retreat or an honorable capture. There was only annihilation. For Soviet troops, this was codified in Soviet Order 227. Not one step back. The enemy in front of you wants to kill you. The command structure behind you will kill you. This order created penal battalions, soldiers sentenced to suicide missions, and, more terrifyingly, machine gun-armed blocking detachments placed behind the front lines. You retreat? You run from the German machine gun? You run directly into the Soviet machine gun of your own side. The psychological terror of being pressed between two lines of fire, one enemy, one your own, is almost incomprehensible. You fight not for victory or for country, but for the one terrible hope that the German shell kills you faster than your own Kommissar. For the Germans, it was the ideological mandate of the Kommissar order and brutal POW treatment. The Einsatzgruppen were already operating behind the lines, more on that horror later, but the standard treatment for Soviet POWs was an orchestrated policy of systemic starvation and neglect that resulted in over 3 million deaths, an astronomical genocidal figure. If you are a Soviet soldier, surrendering doesn't get you a prison camp and a chance to survive. It gets you a cage, typhus, and a slow, agonizing death by hunger. You are ideologically targeted for elimination. This doctrine came to a head in the crucible of urban warfare hell, nowhere more so than Stalingrad. This wasn't a battle. It was a year-long, house-to-house, cellar-to-cellar lottery of death. Snipers, the German Vasily Zaitsev and his Soviet counterparts, turned simple movements into immediate executions. You don't walk across the street, you dart. You don't sleep. You nap with a grenade under your chin. The only thing worse than being trapped in a building is trying to escape one, where every window, every pile of rubble, and every drain pipe is a potential kill zone. Survival here wasn't a matter of skill or courage. It was a matter of pure blind chance, measured in seconds. Logistical collapse and disease. So you managed to dodge the ideological bullets and the physical ones. You're still standing? Now you face the twin silent killers that claimed more lives than many entire fronts. Logistical collapse and disease. The vast scale of the Eastern European theater meant a supply chain breakdown was not just inevitable, it was constant. For the German invasion deep into Russia and for the Soviet defenders fighting across shattered infrastructure, the simple act of feeding and supplying the troops became impossible. Your breakfast is a dream. Your lunch is a memory. Your dinner is often the desperate scavenging of raw, often spoiled, food from deserted villages. This chronic lack of adequate supply leads to widespread malnutrition, compromising your body's defenses. You're not just hungry, you are physically weak, slow, and susceptible. Your survival is now a medical issue, not a tactical one. And here's where the hidden, unglamorous killer steps in. Typhus and dysentery. You dodged the bullet. You survived the shell. Congratulations. Now meet typhus, spread by lice, rampant in the unsanitary conditions of temporary encampments and destroyed cities. Typhus causes raging fever, delirium, and often death. Dysentery, the absolute failure of your bowels, is caused by drinking contaminated water, which is often the only water available. These diseases weren't side effects, they were mass killers. They spread through the close-packed, unwashed lines of soldiers, crippling entire divisions. The field medical services, which were already non-existent or completely overwhelmed, could do nothing but isolate the sick and wait for the inevitable. You survive the most intense combat in human history, only to die a messy, humiliating death on a straw mattress, your body ravaged by microscopic organisms. The Eastern Front was a lottery of sheer, chaotic, random death. A relentless environmental and ideological gauntlet that ensured your total destruction in dozens of different ways. But chaos, as terrible as it is, still offers a microscopic chance for luck. In the next section, we examine the place where the concept of luck was removed entirely, where death was not random, but an industrial guarantee, and where your existence as a human being was grounds for immediate, systematic eradication. We are going to enter the gates of the final solution, and you won't survive the selection. We just left the hell of the Eastern Front, where chaos, cold, and ideology combined to kill you with a statistical certainty of 80%. But that chaos, in the most minuscule way, still offered the sliver of a chance, a lucky shell hole, a successful retreat. Now, we talk about the horror where the element of luck was deliberately, systematically, and industrially removed. We are talking about the final solution. If you were deemed part of a targeted group, your existence itself was your death sentence, regardless of your strength, skill, or will to survive. You didn't need a gun pointed at you. You needed a bureaucrat to sign a form. Part 2. The final solution. The systematic eradication of the civilian. Before the camps, before the gas chambers, the mass murder machine began with the mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. As the Wehrmacht swept east, these units, SS, Gestapo, and local collaborators, followed immediately behind. Their mission was straightforward, meticulous, and chillingly premeditated: pre-camp extermination. This was the first phase of mass, systematic execution via shooting. They would roll into a town, round up the entire Jewish population, often with the assistance of local forces, march them out to a prepared ditch, and execute them line by line. Places like Babi Yar, where over 33,000 people were murdered in just 2 days, are not anomalies. They are the blueprint. Think of the horror. You are not fighting. You are a civilian, standing with your neighbors, your children, your grandparents, at the edge of a deep ravine. There is no resistance, no battle, just the cold, systematic work of men with rifles. The crucial step here was the dehumanization process. The killing had to be methodical enough to be effective, yet psychologically manageable for the killers. By removing the victims from the human equation, by declaring them enemies of the state, vermin, or racial pollutants, The process of murder became a sterile, bureaucratic action. You were already dead in their eyes before the first shovel of earth was moved for your grave. The soldier on the Eastern Front could still be viewed as a threat. You, the civilian, were viewed as a disease to be purged. The concentration and extermination camp system. The mobile killing was too inefficient, too messy, and too psychologically taxing for the perpetrators. The solution? Industrialize it. This brings us to the camps, the definitive engine of your annihilation. It is vital to understand the distinction. There were concentration camps, like Dachau or Buchenwald, used primarily for forced labor, political prisoners, and torture, and extermination camps like Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, built solely and exclusively for mass murder. They were, quite simply, death factories. They had one product, and that product was mass human annihilation. Your fate is determined in the chilling moment of arrival, the instant you step off the cattle car that smells of filth, death, and despair. This is the selection process, the ultimate arbitrary power play. An SS doctor, perhaps Dr. Joseph Mengele himself, stands on the ramp. With a flick of his thumb, a movement of no more than 2 inches, he determines your destiny. Left a chance at short-term forced labor. Right, immediate death. If you are old, too young, visibly weak, or have any physical defect, you go right. If you have any trace of a cough, a limp, or a question in your eyes, you go right. At the peak of their operation at a camp like Auschwitz-Birkenau, the SS selected up to 90% of all arrivals, men, women, and children, for immediate gassing. This is not a battle you can fight. It's a traffic decision. You have a 9 in 10 chance of being dead within 2 hours of stepping off the train. The war is over for you before you've taken a single breath of the camp's air. The conditions of forced labor and slow death. But what if you were one of the lucky 10%? You survived the selection. Congratulations. Your death is no longer instantaneous. It is merely protracted, guaranteed, and methodical. You are now a subject of the deliberate policy known as extermination through labor, Vernichtung durch Arbeit. Your meager rations, a bowl of watery slop and a crust of bread dust, are calculated to provide exactly enough calories to keep you conscious for a shift of back-breaking, unnecessary labor, and not 1 calorie more. You're starving from the moment you wake up to the moment you collapse. The average lifespan of a forced labor prisoner was only a few months. Your body is dissolving day by day, fueled by infectious diseases and a caloric deficit that cannot be overcome. Disease and malnutrition are the camp guard's best allies. Dysentery is a constant. Typhus is endemic, spread by the lice you cannot wash out of your rags. There is no sanitation. There is no clean water. Your entire existence is a slow, agonizing slide toward complete biological collapse. And if you fall ill, there is no hope of recovery, because the one place a sick person might seek help, the camp infirmary, is often the site of the most unspeakable horrors, medical experiments. Non-consensual and often lethal experimentation performed by camp doctors. If you survive an injury or illness, you may be deliberately infected with tuberculosis or typhus, or subjected to freezing, high-altitude, or sterilization experiments. Any hope you might cling to, that a doctor might save you, is transformed into the coldest, most terrifying betrayal imaginable. Your body is no longer your own. It is simply a tool for the state, to be worked to death or used for grotesque research. The scope of the targeting. The Jewish victims, 6 million dead, were the primary central target of this industrialized genocide. They were the group the murder machine was purpose-built to eliminate. But the machinery was expansive enough to catch anyone deemed an ideological, racial, or societal threat. The systematic murder of other targeted groups proves the expansive nature of the Nazi death warrant. The Roma gypsies were also subjected to a near-total genocide. The physically and mentally disabled were murdered under the T4 euthanasia program. Homosexuals, political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses, and vast numbers of Soviet POWs all were fed into the same relentless system. You see, the machine did not care if you were the toughest soldier, the quickest thinker, or the most charming survivor. If you fit into one of the categories on the bureaucratic list, a list that expanded with the Third Reich's arrogance, your death was a historical inevitability, guaranteed not by a stray bullet in the chaos of battle, but by a chilling, precise ideology that viewed your very existence as an unforgivable offense. You wouldn't survive the selection. You wouldn't survive the work. You wouldn't survive the disease. You are a modern person with a modern immune system, a modern sense of justice, and a modern dependency on basic medical care. None of those things exist here. You are broken down into a number and a statistic, and then you are erased. The horrors of the European continent are incomprehensible. But let's move 10,000 miles away, where a different, equally lethal enemy waits. A theater where the jungle, the heat, the fanatical nature of the enemy, and a host of tropical diseases were all poised to finish the job that the Nazis didn't start. Your new enemy is the environment itself. We are heading to the Pacific. We just left the industrial slaughterhouse of Europe, where your death was calculated on a ledger. Now we jump 10,000 miles to a theater where your death is slow, biological, and fanatical. Welcome to the Pacific. You are no longer fighting the cold or the bureaucracy. You are fighting the humidity, the heat, the constant, invisible enemy lurking in the water, and an opponent for whom surrender is a worse fate than execution. This is the Pacific Theater, and it is a completely different kind of nightmare, a beautiful, hot, green hell designed to break you down molecule by molecule. Part 3, the Pacific Theater, the environment and fanaticism as foes. Forget the Japanese soldier for a moment. Your first, most efficient killer is the environment itself. This is the dominance of disease. In campaigns like Guadalcanal and New Guinea, more Allied troops were incapacitated and killed by disease than by enemy fire. That's a staggering, horrific truth. You can be the toughest soldier, the best shot, the most skilled machine gunner, and you will be brought to your knees by a mosquito. Malaria is your daily companion. It's not just a fever, it's a crippling, shaking delirium that racks your body with unstoppable chills, leaving you unable to lift a rifle, let alone fight a battle. You are burning up, soaked in sweat, vomiting, and completely incapable of standing watch. Then comes the dysentery, constant, debilitating, bloody diarrhea caused by the contaminated water you must drink to survive the heat. You are dehydrated, hallucinating, and too weak to walk to the latrine pit, which means the disease spreads like wildfire. You are not killed by a heroic charge. You are killed by a parasite, an amoeba, or a tiny mosquito. You die in a delirium alone, while your squad is fighting a battle you are too weak to join. Then there's the terrain and isolation. The jungle is a claustrophobic, unforgiving beast. Fighting is close quarters, visibility is minimal, and the humidity is a physical weight that crushes your stamina. Logistical resupply, the lifeline of any soldier, constantly fails. Your ammo runs low. Your rations spoil in the heat. Your radio batteries die. You are fighting a hidden enemy in a physical and mental fog, often cut off from command with no real concept of where the front line even is. The jungle eats your supplies, and then it slowly eats you. The Bushido Code and fanatical resistance. Now, let's meet the human enemy. The Japanese Imperial Army was governed by the Bushido Code, the warrior's path. Its most lethal, terrifying application for you is simple: no surrender. This is the non-negotiable difference between the European and Pacific conflicts. In the Pacific, every engagement became a total annihilation battle. There were no mass surrenders, no chance to take prisoners, and no possibility of securing a position. If you found a bunker, you had to assume every man inside was prepared to fight to the death or engage in a banzai charge, a terrifying, final, often suicidal human wave attack. They are charging not because they can win, but because they believe death is the only honorable exit. This fanatical resistance means that securing a position is a constant, exhausting bloodbath. You spend days fighting for a hill, and once you have it, you still have to worry about the hidden enemy. The Japanese built intricate tunnel systems, caves, and hidden fortifications, a warren of death. You kill 20 men in the main position, and you have to spend the next 48 hours clearing the caves with flamethrowers and grenades, knowing that every dark hole and every crack in the rock holds a soldier ready to shoot or stab you at point-blank range. Every seemingly secured area is a potential death trap. You never truly hold the ground. You just temporarily occupy the space above the buried dead. The psychological toll of never knowing if you're safe is as deadly as the snipers. Amphibious assault carnage. You're coming ashore, you are an infantryman in the first wave of an amphibious landing. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu. This is the definition of statistical suicide. The beachhead gauntlet. You are loaded down with equipment, moving slowly across shallow water or open beach. The moment the ramp drops, you are fully exposed to interlocking machine gun fire and heavy artillery sighted perfectly by men who have spent a year perfecting the angles. The ocean is not your friend. It impedes your movement and drowns the wounded. The sand is not cover, it's an exposed, open grave. The first 100 yards of a Pacific beach assault is one of the deadliest places in human history. The sheer, overwhelming firepower from concealed bunkers and pillboxes turns the beach into an inescapable kill zone. You can't run fast enough. You can't hide deep enough. You're a slow-moving target in a perfect firing range, and the men next to you are being shredded before they even reach dry sand. And even if you're not on the beach, you're not safe. The naval threat is constant. You are serving on a ship, a massive metal target in a vast ocean. Submarine warfare is a constant fear, but nothing compares to the absolute psychological terror of the kamikaze attacks towards the end of the war. Think about it. An aircraft, piloted by a man who has made the philosophical commitment to die, is hurtling directly at you, your ship, and your entire crew. There is no defense against fanaticism. You can shoot it down, but its last act is to turn its burning fuselage into a guided missile. You face death not by tactics or skill, but by an opponent's sheer suicidal will, supply failure, and starvation. As the war turned, the logistical failures of the Pacific theater began to crush the Japanese. This brings us to the most unvarnished truth of all: mass death by hunger. For U.S. troops, long supply lines meant being cut off and stranded resulted in running out of critical supplies, clean water, and ammunition. It was an extreme hardship, but for the isolated Japanese garrisons, places like New Guinea, the plight was a living, extended hell. They were completely surrounded, completely blockaded, and left to die by their own command. This is the Japanese plight, near total starvation. In some garrisons, up to 95% of all casualties were due to starvation and malnutrition, not combat. Food ran out. Ammunition ran out. Clean water was impossible to find. Humanity itself began to unravel. This is the point where the dark history must be faced. Mass death from malnutrition became the norm, and in the most desperate, isolated cases, survival was defined by the systematic breakdown of all moral and human codes, including, tragically, cannibalism. You are no longer a soldier. You are a starving, desperate animal in a beautiful cage. You are defeated by the absence of food before the first enemy boot lands on your shore. The jungle and the fanaticism ensured your physical demise, but as the war progressed, the front line became obsolete. The safety of distance, of being a civilian, of being anywhere not immediately occupied, was annihilated. The war was no longer fought between armies, it was fought against you, the non-combatant, from 30,000 feet. Next, we look at the strategic campaigns that turned entire cities into self-sustaining firestorms, the ultimate, terrifying death from above. We just established that the greatest killers in the Pacific were the mosquito and the fanatical soldier. Now, we leave the hell of the jungle for the illusory safety of the city. You, the civilian, the factory worker, the person who believes they are removed from the front lines, are about to meet the next statistical certainty of your death. Strategic bombing campaigns. This is where the concept of total war reached its terrible zenith. The front line is dead. The war is no longer fought between armies in a muddy field. It is fought against the entire capacity of a nation, and that includes your house, your hospital, and your life. You look up, and your enemy is no longer a man. It is a metallic god dropping fire from 30,000 feet. And Part 4, Strategic Bombing Campaigns, the Death of the Front Line. Let's first look at the perspective of those delivering the death. You think being a pilot or a crewman is glamorous? Think again. Your first death sentence is delivered by a statistic. Look at the British Royal Air Force Bomber Command mortality rate. The attrition was so devastating that, by some measures, serving as a flight crew member had a higher death rate than serving in the infantry trenches of World War I. You were, statistically, more likely to die in the freezing, thin air over Germany than you were crossing no man's land in 1916. Your expected lifespan was measured not in years, but in sorties. The number of missions you had to fly before the inevitable happened. For many, that number was terrifyingly low. This is the ordeal of the flight. You are flying for hours in temperatures that can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. You risk frostbite not on your extremities, but on your eyeballs if your oxygen mask slips. You deal with the constant threat of oxygen failure, where you quietly slip into unconsciousness and death without realizing it. You risk mid-air collisions in the black, chaotic swarm of hundreds of bombers. And then comes the combined assault, the terrifying, flashing starbursts of flak, anti-aircraft artillery that send shrapnel tearing through the thin aluminum fuselage, and the deadly silent stalkers, the night fighters, flown by highly skilled pilots dedicated to incinerating you in your metal coffin. You don't survive a ditching in the North Sea. You don't survive a direct hit from a flak shell. You are a human being wrapped in a thin layer of metal, exposed to a perfect storm of freezing cold enemy fire and sheer, blind mechanical failure. The creation of the firestorm. But the real target, the one that guarantees the most horrifying kind of death, is the civilian population huddled below. This is the creation of the firestorm. The goal of the strategic bombing was not precision. It was terror and complete economic collapse. It was the civilian annihilation, the deliberate, scientific targeting of cities to create a massive, self-sustaining inferno. Think Hamburg, Dresden, or Tokyo. These firestorms were weather systems made of heat. They generated their own hurricane-force winds, sucking air in at the edges and pushing temperatures to levels that could melt asphalt, vaporize water, and, critically, melt glass and pavement. And this brings us to the lack of escape. You heard the sirens. You ran to the basement. You are safe from the blast, right? Wrong. The inferno consumes all the oxygen in the area. The heat is so intense that the air in your cellar shelter begins to be vacuumed out, replaced by toxic, superheated gases. You die not from the blast or the fire, but from suffocation. Your lungs are starved of air, or they are burned from the inside out by the sheer temperature of the air you are forced to breathe. The basement, The place designed to save you becomes your inescapable superheated tomb. You are found later, preserved in a huddle, dead from a lack of air and a temperature that flash-cooked your organs. Vengeance weapons, an asymmetric threat. Just when you thought you had a handle on the horror, the warning, the siren, the dash to the shelter, the Germans introduced the weapons that completely removed the element of warning. The vengeance weapons. The V-1 flying bomb, the doodle bug, and the V-2 ballistic missile. This is V-1 and V-2 terror. They were deployed against London, Antwerp, and other critical Allied cities. The V-1 was terrifying because you could hear its engine cut out, and you knew that silence meant it was about to drop. You had a few agonizing seconds to pray, but the V-2? It was the precursor to the modern missile. It flew faster than the speed of sound. It gave no warning. It allowed no defense. You could be walking to the market, talking to a friend, or asleep in your bed, and in the next instant, your entire block is simply gone, replaced by a deep crater and a cloud of dust. You are playing a lethal game of chance where the odds are controlled by a missile you cannot see, cannot hear, and cannot run from. This creates an intense psychological warfare, the constant, unrelenting psychological pressure of air raid sirens, the near misses, the sight of entire neighborhoods simply vaporized, wears down your sanity. You develop V2 syndrome, the constant nervous tension of looking up, of listening for the sound that will either save you, the V1 engine, or kill you without a sound, the V2. Your survival is not just physical, it is a daily, exhausting battle against complete mental breakdown, industrial targeting, and collateral damage. Let's say you survive the firestorm and the missile. You now have to deal with the after effects. If you worked in a war production factory and in total war, virtually everything was a war factory, you were in harm's way. These were priority targets for Allied bombing. Going to work was volunteering for a high-risk assignment. You weren't safe in the office, on the line, or even in the shelter beneath the plant. The enemy wanted to destroy your capacity to work, and you were collateral damage in that grand strategy. And for those who survived the blast, there is the infrastructure collapse, the destruction of utilities, hospitals, and transit systems. You might have survived the building collapse, but you now face a death by systemic failure. No clean water means you're back to dysentery and typhoid. No working hospitals means that minor shrapnel wound turns into a lethal septic infection. A lack of transit means food can't reach the city. Those who survived the blast often died later from lack of medical care, clean water, or exposure. The bomb itself is simply the opening act. Your death is guaranteed either by instantaneous firestorm or by the slow, grinding collapse of every system that keeps a modern human being alive. We have covered the chaotic slaughter of the East, the industrial extermination of the camps, the biological hell of the Pacific, and the firestorm of the cities. But so far, the fighting has been primarily about maneuver and total war. Next, we focus on the infantryman's instant personal death, the shock, the overwhelming firepower, and the pure terror of the decisive, desperate battles that broke fortified lines. We are going to the beachheads and the hedgerows, and you will not survive the first 100 yards. We've navigated the statistical certainties of the East, the industrial horror of the camps, and the biological warfare of the Pacific. Now, we confront the rawest, most fundamental fear, instantaneous death. We are putting you in the uniform of the infantrymen. At the moment of the critical assault, you have been trained to advance, to fight, to break the line. But World War II assault tactics were designed to generate maximal, overwhelming, and focused firepower. Your survival will not be measured in weeks, days, or hours. It will be measured in the terrifying few seconds it takes for a machine gun to traverse its line of fire. You will not survive the breakthrough battles and amphibious assaults, the instantaneous death. Let's put you on the ramp of a landing craft just before it hits the shore. This is the beachhead catastrophe, and it is quite literally statistical suicide. You are loaded down with 80 pounds of gear, your rifle, your shovel, your grenades, and you are already soaked through from the cold water. The ramp drops. You are now in the first 100 yards, the most perfectly orchestrated kill zone in history, exemplified by places like Omaha Beach on D-Day. The enemy has spent months sighting their weapons. Every obstacle is covered. Every gap is pre-sighted. As you step into the water, you are instantly exposed to a perfect coordination of firepower from bunkers, pillboxes, and interlocking machine guns. You are moving slowly, weighted down, tripping over underwater obstacles in the bodies of the men who went before you. You are a slow-moving target in an area where the air is so thick with lead that it's difficult to breathe. You don't advance, you crawl, hoping that the man next to you catches the bullet that was meant for you. This is the inability to hide. The beach offers no cover. The sand is kicked up around you, turning to a fine dust mixed with blood and brine. Your early armor, that light steel helmet, is useless against a high-velocity rifle round or a shell fragment. The concrete fortifications are designed to shrug off early naval fire, meaning the only target they have is you, the soft, exposed infantryman caught between the sea and the guns. Your life is over before your feet hit dry sand. Close quarters firepower. You somehow made it past the initial deluge. Now you face the meat of the defense, the sheer, overwhelming, concentrated force of artillery. The German military doctrine was defense in depth. It wasn't one fortified line, it was a layered defense of mines, barbed wire, trenches, and camouflaged pillboxes, designed not to hold a line indefinitely, but to ensure that the initial breakthrough attempt resulted in maximum casualties. Every step forward you take guarantees a higher price in blood, because you're crossing a defensive layer specifically designed to cripple and confuse you. But the worst is the air. This is the mortar and artillery concentration. The defending force has the ability to drop a box barrage, a relentless curtain of high explosives, on a small, specific area like your bridgehead. You are not killed by a direct hit. You are killed by shrapnel, fragments of white-hot steel moving at lethal velocity, turning your body into a sieve. Or you are killed by the silent, unseen killer, concussion. The massive overpressure of a high-explosive shell bursts your eardrums, ruptures your internal organs, and leaves you dead without a mark on your uniform. You survive the flash, only to collapse seconds later, your lungs and brain destroyed by a wave of pure force. You are a soft target against the industrial power of high explosives. The hedgerows in close combat. You finally made it off the beach and pushed inland. Congratulations. You are now in the most intimate, terrifying fighting of the European theater, the bocage hell of Normandy. The bocage, ancient, thick earth banks covered in tangled roots and shrubs, turns the entire landscape into a giant open-air fortress, broken up into small, fortified fields. Every corner is a potential sniper's nest. Every hedgerow is a potential German ambush squad armed with a machine gun and anti-tank weapons. You move through a suffocating, terrifying maze where visibility is 10 feet, and you are never more than a few yards from a concealed enemy. You cannot use tanks for support because they cannot traverse the banks, and they cannot see into the tight corners. You are reduced to brutal, close-quarters combat. This is the tank-infantry duel. You are an individual soldier. Suddenly you encounter a Panzer or a Tiger tank, and you are separated from your anti-tank support. You are completely and utterly vulnerable. The enemy tank, a behemoth of steel, can eliminate you with its machine gun or a high-explosive shell that turns your cover into lethal debris. Conversely, the introduction of weapons like the Panzerfaust made every foot soldier a potential tank killer, meaning the tank crews are now also fanatically focused on eliminating you, the foot soldier, first. It is a desperate, intimate, unequal duel, where the loser is often turned into a fine red mist. The brutality of the final objective. You have fought your way through the fields, the villages, and the defenses. Now, you must secure the ultimate objective, the fortified position, the pillbox, the bunker. This is the absolute suicidal nature of tunnel and bunker clearing. You cannot simply walk in. You must clear these fortifications with flamethrowers, satchel charges, and hand grenades. It is a desperate, often hand-to-hand fight in a dark, confined space where the defender knows every corner, and the casualty rate for the attacker is immense. You are breathing smoke and concrete dust, fighting a man who knows he cannot surrender, in a space where there is no room to maneuver, and the only certainty is a flash of light followed by oblivion. Even when you are holding a position, the fight is not over. You face the sniper's patience, the constant, unseen threat of skilled snipers in both urban ruins and the thick, rural environments. A sniper is not interested in mass slaughter. He is interested in targeted assassination. You try to fetch water. You move to relieve yourself. You peek around a corner. That simple human action is the high lethality risk a sniper is waiting for. A tiny metallic click, a moment of sharp pain, and your war is over. Your greatest fear is not the mass attack. It is the silent, personal, precise execution from a ghost you will never see. You have been shattered by a shell, bled out in a hedgerow, or executed by an unseen rifleman. Your life ended in seconds, a forgotten drop in the bloodiest ocean of war. But what if you, through some miracle of luck and timing, survived the infantry charge, the bombing, and the disease? What if you were a civilian in a city that was not immediately liberated? What if you lived but under the constant, suffocating fear of a police state? Next, we look at the unique dangers of living under life under occupation, the silent, psychological, and moral killer that turns every day into a brutal calculation of collaboration versus execution. You survived the Eastern Front, the final solution, the Pacific Hell, the firestorms, and the slaughter of the beachheads. You are an anomaly, a statistical miracle. But your war is not over. You are now a civilian, living under life under occupation, a silent, moral, and psychological war where survival is a daily, agonizing calculation of risk, ethics, and paranoia. The dangers here are not explosive, they are systemic. They are designed to break your spirit, your community, and your sense of self. Your new enemy is the banality of evil, the necessity of collaboration, and the absolute horror of collective punishment. Part 6. Life under occupation. The silent and moral killer. The most terrifying truth of life under occupation is that your fate is not your own. It is tied to the actions of a person you have never met. This is the horror of collective punishment, the official, ruthless policy of the German and Japanese occupiers. A single partisan, a single act of resistance, a train derailed, a minor official assassinated, is met with a furious, disproportionate response. The policy? Execute dozens or even hundreds of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, in retaliation. Think of the destruction of the Czech village of Lidice, where every man was executed, every woman sent to a concentration camp, and the children sent to Germanization programs or death. This was a response to a single successful assassination. This policy forces upon you the moral dilemma. You want to join the resistance. You want to fight for freedom. But if you do, you are not just risking your own life. You are signing the death warrant for your neighbor, your street, or your entire village. Do you resist and doom your community to execution? Or do you comply with the occupier and face the moral ruin of complicity, only to be judged as a collaborator after the war? This daily decision is the war's deepest, most corrosive psychological killer: systematic starvation and resource theft. The occupiers did not just take your freedom, they took your food. This is the occupation economy, the deliberate, systematic policy of extracting all food and resources from occupied territories for the benefit of their own troops and home populations. This leads to systemic starvation. The most famous example is the Dutch hunger winter, where the German blockade and resource seizure led to thousands of deaths from starvation and cold. You are not starving because of a crop failure. You are starving because the state has calculated that your death is a logistical benefit. You are not fighting a battle for your life. You are fighting a quiet, desperate battle for calories. Your diet is supplemented by whatever scraps you can find: tulip bulbs, sugar beet pulp, anything to stave off the gnawing hunger. You are physically weak, cold, and chronically ill. And if your body is not strong enough to resist, you are selected for forced labor and deportation. Millions of citizens were rounded up and sent to work as slave labor in German factories, where they were exposed to Allied bombing, harsh conditions, lack of medical care, and constant brutality. You survive the occupation of your city only to be deported to the industrial hell of a bombed-out factory where the work will kill you slowly and brutally. Gestapo and Kempeitai terror. The infrastructure of occupation is fear, and fear is maintained by the secret police, the Gestapo in Europe, the Kempeitai in Asia. This is the absolute reality of the police state: constant surveillance and paralyzing fear. Any act of dissent, minor criticism, listening to an illegal radio broadcast, or simply looking at an officer the wrong way is punishable by immediate, brutal, and often fatal torture, imprisonment, or execution. Neighbors turn on neighbors. Children are encouraged to report on their parents, and an atmosphere of pervasive paranoia turns every conversation into a calculated risk. The secret police have a special interest in targeting the intelligentsia, the systematic arrests and murders of teachers, politicians, priests, and community leaders. They eliminate the people who could organize resistance, who could inspire hope, and who could remind the population of their identity. When the community leaders are gone, the community itself fractures, leaving you alone and isolated with no one to trust and no one to lead. You are a human being whose voice is not only silenced, but whose very thoughts are criminalized. The insurgency trap, yet, some of the bravest chose the path of resistance. They joined the partisan groups. This is the insurgency trap, and the price is almost universally fatal. The cost of partisan warfare is immense. You are fighting an overwhelming professional military force with limited supplies, a constant lack of food, and non-existent medical care. You are constantly exposed to the elements, dealing with brutal environmental conditions that are almost as lethal as the enemy. The brutal efficiency of the German counterinsurgency means that most partisan groups faced a devastating, overwhelming force that made survival for long periods statistically improbable. And here is the final bitter twist: survival post-liberation. You survive the Gestapo. You survive the brutal winter in the mountains. You survive the firefights. But the moment the occupiers are gone, the society you fought for turns on itself. You now face the very real danger of being caught in the post-war settling of scores, the savage, immediate retribution against those who collaborated, or those accused of collaboration. Neighbors who despised you, personal rivals, or simply the chaotic justice of the mob can point a finger, and you are dragged out into the street. You are executed not by the enemy, but by the very people you sought to liberate, caught up in the fury of a nation finally tasting its freedom. You survive the brutality, the starvation, and the secret police only to face the firing squad of your own people or a lifetime of moral damage. But the most devastating truth of all is that the Second World War was the moment in history when man perfected the art of killing. It was a technological leap from the mud of World War I to the atomized terror of the future. Our final look at your inevitable demise will synthesize this leap. How the new weapons and the ultimate horror of the atomic age guaranteed that even those who physically survived the conflict would be fundamentally, irrevocably broken. We have chronicled your statistical annihilation across 6 different fronts: the freezing mud, the gas chamber, the tropical disease, the urban firestorm, the shrapnel-laced beachhead, and the moral terror of the occupation. But your death in World War II is fundamentally guaranteed not just by the brutality of the men, but by the devastating technological apex of the entire conflict. The Second World War was the moment mankind perfected the art of killing, ensuring that even if you survive physically, the technology of the war would guarantee your complete psychological ruin. Part 7. The Technological Apex, the Atomization of Warfare and Psychological Ruin. The previous war was the grinding, anticipated death of the trench. World War II introduced the speed of annihilation, the blitzkrieg. The doctrine of rapid, motorized maneuver warfare bypassed and ridiculed the static lines of World War I. You are no longer fighting for 5 yards of mud. You are now being rapidly encircled, flanked, and cut off by tanks moving 60 miles a day. The sheer speed leads to mass encirclements and the rapid collapse of entire armies. You are a soldier, and you are given no time to regroup, no time to retreat, and no time to organize a defense. You are simply bypassed and surrounded, left as a helpless pocket of resistance waiting for the final overwhelming assault. And this rapid movement is supported by the air. Air superiority means that your movement is guaranteed to be detected and instantly punished. The scream of the Stuka dive bomber, a sound deliberately engineered to shatter morale, is the sound of a bomb being guided directly to your position, eliminating any possibility of open field movement without extreme losses. The moment you break cover, you are visible from the air, and your life is measured in the few seconds it takes the pilot to press the pickle button. The new weapons of individual lethality. The war was also made exponentially more lethal by the new weapons that put massive firepower into the hands of the individual soldier. This is where your chances of surviving close combat vanished entirely. This is the age of the assault rifle, weapons like the German St. G44. Compare it to the bolt-action, single-shot rifle of 1914. Your individual rate of fire and lethality are increased exponentially. Combat is no longer about marksmanship. It is about suppressive, concentrated fire. A single, unseen soldier can now spray a volume of lead that used to require a team. You are instantly less safe in a trench, a building, or a foxhole. The sheer volume of fire available guarantees that the engagement will be shorter, closer, and more overwhelmingly fatal for anyone caught in the crossfire. And the introduction of man-portable anti-tank weapons, the Panzerfaust, the bazooka, means that every single foot soldier has the potential to eliminate a tank. This makes the engagements more intense, more personal, and more desperate. The line between infantry and armor is blurred, and the consequence is that when you meet the enemy, there is no chance for a minor skirmish. It is a duel to the death, where your opponent has the technological capacity to vaporize your cover and your body in an instant. The atomic revelation and environmental death. All the previous horrors, the disease, the cold, the fanatical charge, paled in comparison to the single event that defined the end of the war and your ultimate final death, the ultimate annihilation. We are talking about the unique form of death delivered in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You didn't survive a gunfight. You didn't survive a disease. You are a civilian going about your morning. And then there is the flash. Your death is not by bomb. It is by atomization. Immediate vaporization for those closest to the epicenter. Then comes the blast force, a physical wall of air and debris moving faster than sound. Then comes the thermal burns, people whose skin melts off their bones or who are left with the ghost-like outline of their shadow permanently burned into stone walls. And for those who survive the immediate horror, there is the slow, insidious killer, radiation sickness. an invisible, odorless, tasteless poison that attacks your cells, your bone marrow, and your organs. You feel fine, but you are already dying from the inside out, destined for a lifetime of leukemia, sickness, and a terrifying, slow death with no hope of recovery. This single event, the power of the nuclear weapon, was the end of conventional safety. It rendered all previous survival methods obsolete. No trench, no fortress, no air defense can save you from a single weapon that can wipe an entire city or even a civilization from the map. The technology of World War II guaranteed your physical death was now total, complete, and final. The psychological scars. So, you survived. You were nowhere near the bomb, you dodged the shrapnel, you didn't catch the typhus, you physically walked out of the 6-year hell. You are a survivor, but you are fundamentally broken. You are a survivor who didn't survive. You carry the moral injury of the conflict, the lasting trauma suffered by those who were forced to commit or endure the witnessing of systematic human rights abuses. You cannot simply unsee the pile of corpses. You cannot uncommit the atrocities you were ordered to perform. You are carrying a ghost in your own mind, a shadow of the person you once were, a wound on your soul that will never heal. And finally, you return home to the ruins of home. You survive the war physically, only to return to a completely destroyed city, a collapsed economy, and a nation that is reeling from millions of deaths. There is no job. There is no home. There is no comfort. You are left with a lifelong struggle with displacement, poverty, and crippling mental illness. The war ends, but your internal battle with the horrors you witnessed, what we now call PTSD, begins a new, lifelong sentence. The World War II you would enter is not the film you saw. It is a statistical grinder, a biological horror, a technological singularity of destruction, and a psychological meat market. You wouldn't have survived the bullet, the disease, the gas, the fire, or the hunger. And even if you miraculously dodged them all, the psychological scars of what you would have been forced to do, forced to see, and forced to endure, mean that the you who went into the war would have been dead long before the final peace treaty was signed. That is the unvarnished truth.
Thanks for watching.